Hello, everyone. As you may know, we are in a new school year. And that means everyone's literal favorite thing, more new global. Just kidding, of course. But I am back today and will be back many more times through the year to go through the very important global material with you all. Let's not waste any time on today's show. We're discussing revolutions. Thank you so much for joining us. And something you may not know is there are actually two types of revolutions that we will be discussing today, and one is intellectual, one is political, and they both happen in the course of our discussion, the course of our show today. And the intellectual revolution we'll be discussing is, of course, the Enlightenment, and something you need to know about the Enlightenment and all other intellectual revolutions that take place throughout the course of history. Intellectual revolutions tend to lead to great political, economic, and or social changes. And they often challenge typical norms and lead to changes in values and philosophies. They're often resisted by those who fear a change in the way things are. Things could get a little more serious when political revolutions come afoot. They tend to serve the interests of the class or group of people leading the change, leading the revolution. In the case of the French Revolution, one we will be discussing today, it's oftentimes the bourgeoisie who are going to be the leaders of that. They tend to pursue conflicting goals, and political revolutions often ignore the struggles of some of the lowest classes. Failure to meet the needs of the lowest classes often lead to radicalizations, which are very different ideas that are outside the way things are normally done in a certain country. And of course, the sans-culottes are other people who wanted more radical change from the French Revolution, but we'll, of course, get into all that as time continues. All right, so, here's some of the key things you need to know about the Enlightenment. It called into question traditional beliefs and inspired widespread political and economic social change. This movement was used to challenge political authorities, as we mentioned, in Europe and colonial rule in the Americas. These ideals inspired political and social movements and spread like wildfire. Enlightenment thinkers developed political philosophies based on natural laws, which included the concepts of social contract, consent of the governed, and rights of the citizens. Some of the things you will quickly need to know about this is absolutism, the divine right, which is the Lord from right, the light from the Lord to rule, and absolutism is defined by pretty much the acceptance or belief in absolute principles in political, philosophical, or religious matters. You're also going to need to know about absolute monarchy, which is when there's one king or a queen like they had in France, like one absolute ruler. A social contract, which is something we will get into very shortly, the ideals of democracy, which I'm sure everyone at least knows a little bit about. Natural rights, which are the rights you're born with. Separation of powers, legislative, judicial, checks and balances, etc. Tyranny, what some people said King Louis was, and general will of the people. And speaking of people, some people you're going to need to know are the Enlightenment thinkers. John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Cesar Beccaria. So why not start by going through some of these people? So first we're going to start with John Locke. And he was one of the lead Enlightenment thinkers, and he believed in natural rights, life, liberty, and property that were fundamental to the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Some of the things that Locke did believe, which was rights for all. Everyone had these natural rights that they were born with, and that was inspired by, again, the Declaration of Independence and the United Nations Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations created. Also, we turn now to Montesquieu. He believed in the separation of powers. France, United States, Latin America, and Latin American nations all use separation of powers in new constitutions that they did, which pretty much separation of powers means, you may wonder why we have Congress, which makes the laws, the president, which enforces the laws, and the executive branch, and the judicial branch, which reviews the laws for their constitutionality and among other things. And that's pretty much the separation of powers. So no one branch of government decides everything. There's a way to avoid absolute monarchy. Voltaire is the leader of freedom of thought and expression. I'll fight for your right to say whatever you want, even if I disagree with it. Fight to the death for your right to say whatever you want. This idea was used in the U.S. Bill of Rights and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. The European monarchs European monarchs did reduce or eliminate censorship after this idea was spread. Beccaria believed in the abolishment of torture, and he was a big crime and punishment type person. That's something you need to know. And Voltaire believed in religious freedom. So those are some of the most important people you need to know. Oh, of course, how I forgot the one woman who was bold enough to speak out, and she believed. And by the way, her name was Mary Wollstonecraft. Can't forget about her. She was a very important Enlightenment thinker. Very sorry about forgetting her there for a little bit. She believed in the ideas that all women had the ideas to education. She believed that their people should focus on improving their own lives, not just by one absolute being. And she very much believed in women's equality, the idea for women to choose what they want to do and be taught equally, and not just be taught to cook and clean and all that stuff. All right, so that's pretty much what the Enlightenment thinkers had to offer, and now we're moving on to the French Revolution, and it's just starting, but already we are seeing some problems. And we're going to look at the systems of government that led to the uprising, the crazy uprising that is the French Revolution. And here, so very quickly, just to give you kind of an idea of how bad things were just through one chart that's shown up multiple times throughout our coverage of the French Revolution in Global, you get the idea. There's a bar graph that says population. It gives you the idea of the first estate, which is the clergy, the second estate, which is the nobility. You cannot mix things up. Think of the clergy coming first. The church comes first. So they're the first estate. The second estate would be the nobility, and the third estate is the commoners, everyone else, the third estate. And you get the idea. Population, 0.5% of the population is the first estate, the clergy. 1.5 is the nobility. 98% of the population is and it's a pretty rapidly growing population, is the third estate. Land ownership, 10% is owned by the 0.5% of the population of the church. 25% is owned by the nobility, and 65% is owned by of the land is owned by 98% of the country in the third estate. Government taxation, well, this one's pretty simple. For the first estate, 0. For the second estate, 0 government taxation. For the third estate, well, 100%. So you kind of get the idea of why things were not going so great. Just through one chart. That's a very explanatory chart, just to say the least, through as some of the causes of the French Revolution began to take shape. Another cause of this revolution was that King Louis had control of every aspect of the government and used many powers. He used his many powers for his own gain, angering millions in the third estate. He also controlled many of the freedoms the French people would have to express their opinions. Also, some of the ideas such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press that the United States was using, and France was realizing that the United States was using these ideas, they were not happy. They were like, I want to use these ideas too. These look like pretty good ideas, but we look over, we have our government, and they're saying all these things like, you can't express any opinion against the state. It's going to be really bad. And then they're not allowed to do it, and they're getting pretty pissed about it. It's not very good at all. So anyway, yeah. And there's also a major thing is high taxes, as we mentioned. The clergy earn more, yet paid less taxes than the peasants. And it shows you how much some priests made versus how how much a typical carpenter made, and it was just such a big disparity. Massive income inequality was permeating France. All the money was going to the top, and the top was spending it very, very poorly. They were spending it all on foreign affairs, they were spending it on the royal household, and they were spending it on trying to fix their debt, which was not something that very many people liked at all. Yeah, so, and also another thing was, again, foreign wars, that also made a lot of people very mad. So pretty much through the government's gross mismanagement of the debt and the money that was in the country of France, a financial crisis began to arise. It was that simple, and they called the Estates General in to meet to discuss what to do about this whole entire situation. And this was called by Jacques Necker, who was a very popular financial advisor with the people, at least, that King Louis had. And the Third Estate had one vote, even though, again, there were 98% of the country, and the clergy and the nobility also had one vote. You think, okay, it's fair, right? But no, the nobility and the clergy are probably going to be aligned, but they're going to vote against the peasants every time, even though the peasants have way more people. Not a good situation at all. This was significant because the rights of the Third Estate were being violated again pretty much for the last time. And after the First and Second Estates and all the Third Estate, they're meeting and they take a lunch break. Okay, that's right. And then they literally get locked out of the parliamentary meeting after the lunch break by the First and Second Estate. So what they do is they go to the tennis court to the next building and form the National Assembly. This represents a major act of defiance against the First Estate and the king. People get so enraged by this entire situation, and some of the knowledge of what the French government is doing to their people was really starting to spread. So what they did then was, in an effort to attempt to take up arms, they stormed the Bastille. The Bastille was a prison/fort in the center of Paris that held gunpowder, and they needed gunpowder. But really what it represented was a direct and incredibly violent blow against the French feudal system and basic government structure, like pretty much the way France worked. It was a very violent assault, and it was assault that was they were not there to mess around, which is pretty much how it worked in the end. They were there for business, and they were there to get one thing done. They were there to get gunpowder and possibly have the beginning of a revolution. Then, as time wore on, believe it or not, the French people actually got even bolder, and they decided to say, enough with the feudal system. We're literally going to create a decree saying we do not recognize the feudal system anymore, which is kind of made things a little awkward. And it was really a further attack, a big attack against the French monarchy. And then they kind of went all out, and they created what kind of amounted to a little bit of a constitution. It was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens, of a document that outlined the revolutionary forces' demands for rights in the future. It was the first on-paper, non-violent step issuing a demand of some of the rights that they needed, and they really desired to feel like they live in a free society where they're actually being kind of respected. Pretty much the main idea was all men are equal, all class rules are over with and finished, and they really kind of wanted to just create a constitutional monarchy. It was a relatively moderate thing. It was not, I guess you could say it was a pretty bold step at the time, but things in preparation to like a few years later, things at that time did look quite tame. All right, so we continue on at this point with the Women's March of Versailles. Women were fed up, so mostly peasant women, with the lack of supplies and poor treatment they received from the French monarchy. So what they did is they stormed the castle, and they wanted to literally kill the queen in the most violent way possible. They just want to literally beat her up pretty much to death. And this represented a direct attack on the queen in her own house, giving the royals an idea of the rage of their people they'd previously been relatively disconnected with. So that's pretty much what they were talking about. The Constitution laid out the rights and the possibility the Constitution of 1791 that they did after the women marched on Versailles unsuccessfully, I might add, trying to attack the Queen. The Constitution of 1791 was soon passed, and that was passed again by the National Assembly. That was pretty much trying to, again, for